Hello, Wheaton sports fans. This is Talkin Wheaton Sports with Lou Ragoose. I hope you enjoyed our last episode, talking with Jerry Schultz about his professional baseball career with the New York Yankees minor leagues. If you missed it, click the link at the top of the screen, and then we'll share it again at the end of this episode. Today, our special guest, when he arrived in Wheaton as a teacher and coach, he looked younger than many of the kids he taught and coached. He then went on to teach and coach for decades, setting the record at the time for the longest coaching tenure in Wheaton history. Our guest today is George Sawyer. Thanks for joining us, George.
You bet.
Now,
it's an honor to be on.
Yeah, and we're so glad to have you, and you still live in the Wheaton area. Is that correct?
Yes, I've been here for 66 years.
All right. And you are now 87 years old, is that right?
That is correct. I hate to admit it, but that's where it adds up to.
Well, I'm just gonna point that out at the beginning here because we're not gonna hold it against you if there's something that that you can't quite remember. I'll do my best to prompt you, but I think we all need to keep that in mind, that it's not as easy to remember everything as it used to be. But we have a lot to talk about today. First of all, how did you end up in Wheaton?
Well, I graduated from Concordia College, and Wheaton hired a new superintendent in 1957, H. Gordon Anderson, and he interviewed me at Concordia, and I decided to give it a shot. I didn't know how to get to Wheaton, so I had to get out the map to figure out how to get here, but I didn't live very far away. So coming from Fergus Falls.
You grew up and graduated from Fergus Falls High School?
Yes, I did. All my high school years were spent in Fergus Falls.
Okay, so you came to Wheaton. What year was it? And I assume that's in the old high school. And what did you teach right away?
Okay, I came in 1957, and I worked in the old high school, and I taught social studies and driver's ed, and was hired as a coach. I was the first wrestling coach they hired at Wheaton.
Oh, really? And did you have a lot of wrestling experience before that?
In Phi Ed. So
really?
All that, it was just really beginning at that time. I know my senior year in Fergus Falls, which was 1953, was the year that they started wrestling. And I think one of the coaches at Wheaton started it maybe the year or two before I came. I'm trying to, I think it was Schlottman, I think was his last name. I didn't know him, but he coached at Park Rapids, I know, after that.
Uh-huh. And then what other types of coaching did you get into when you came to Wheaton?
Well, I was hired as head wrestling coach, junior high football, although I worked right with the football team. A fellow named John Gustafson was his first year as head coach. And then I was an assistant in all the spring sports in that first year, but I spent most of it was baseball.
Okay. And then you got into basketball at some point as well.
Yeah, I coached most of my years in basketball also. I was under Wally Simonson, who was the head coach. I was a B squad coach for several years. And then I was head coach for 3 years. And then I had a hiatus for maybe 2 or 3 years, and they were having trouble with the junior high program. So I said I would do it, and I ended up doing that. I believe right to the end that I quit teaching, which was in 1992. And
you kind of bridged the gap there between Wally Simonson as the head basketball coach and when Neil Johnson came and took over. First of all,
that's correct. Yes,
a lot of people might not be fully aware of what it was like with Wally Simonson, but they had a lot of success in the program in the 1950s. So, what kind of things did you learn from him, and then how did you apply that when you were the head coach?
Well, that was his first status as a head coach too. So I think I helped him along the way too, because I played basketball all my life. In fact, I started as a freshman at Concordia, And I don't know, we did a lot of fast break, and he ran a middle open offense, which was new to me, where they played with a single guard in front and two forwards and two other guards, actually three guards. And so that was an experience, but we had some outstanding players back in those days.
Yeah. And do you remember what years you were the head coach for basketball?
Oh, from about right the middle 65 to 68, maybe somewhere in there. It was a 3-year stint anyway.
Right. So that would have been like right after like the Jerry Schultz era.
Right. I had all those fellows in B squad. Mm-hmm. We had some outstanding records. I remember we were in the old resort region with Fergus and Alec and Detroit Lakes and Moran and Breck, and over a 2-year period, we lost one game in B squad.
What was it like to go back to Fergus Falls and beat them as a coach?
Well, that was always outstanding. My head baseball coach was still the coach at Fergus, so we had a close relationship. It was always fun and interesting.
And then, so when Neil Johnson came in as basketball coach, did you say that was at the point that you went back to B squad or junior high, or what happened at that point?
No, I took a couple, 3 years where I didn't do anything in the wintertime, but they were having trouble with the junior high program, and I agreed to come back. So it was probably around 1970, I suppose, that I went back at it. I had Peter Nats, who you interviewed here recently, and that was always a fun experience. He was quite an athlete.
Yeah, and that team was pretty good?
Yeah, they were good, yeah. And, of course, when the Kubat boy moved in for his senior year, it made quite a difference. They were with the hair of going to the state tournament, but didn't quite make it.
Yeah. And you're obviously best known for coaching baseball in Wheaton. How did that all get started?
Well, I came in as assistant baseball, and that was always one of my. I enjoyed the sports during the season. I liked football during football and basketball during basketball and baseball during baseball. But I had a long history back in baseball in Fergus, and that they had outstanding town teams in the summertime. That was back right after World War II. And it was really a flourishing experience back then. There were lots of pro players playing in this area, and they got some of the outstanding college guys, young from like Texas and out east Lafayette. And they were all hired, I think, actually, other than maybe one local. And Fergus won the AA or AAA, it might have been back in those days. And I was the bat boy. And even in the later years when I played myself and had a pretty good career, they always remembered me as a Fergus Falls bat boy for the Red Sox. So that's where I got started. And there were I had some outstanding instructors and guys like Hal Younghans. He ended up at AAA, and back in the days when Minneapolis St. Paul had AAA baseball, Jim McNulty, who came out of the Brooklyn chain, and they said he was actually a better fielder than Jackie Robinson, but didn't hit as well. And a lot of times they actually made more money, I think, coming out and playing in these local leagues. It was really an exciting time in that, I think it was 1950, Fergus won the state, and we averaged like 3,000 people at a baseball game.
Wow.
On weekends. It was really big, and that's where I got started, and then I played all my life.
Sure.
Started in high school, I suppose, as a 10th grader, we went out and played for the smaller communities like Underwood, and I played for Dalton, and then I ended up actually playing with the Fergus Red Sox my latter years.
Sure. So when you started coaching sorry.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
When you started coaching in Wheaton, do you remember some of the first players that you had?
Well, yes. The first year I was assistant, and Gary Fable was probably the outstanding athlete of that period of time with, there was Ladislaw Boy and Oscarson and, as we went on a little bit, there was Lynn Nelson and, I had a lot of boys come out of Dumont. There were families like the Wilsons family. They had Doug and Tom and Bruce, and I suppose I'll miss somebody going through. And then I had the Baldry family, and I had three of those sons I know play for me, Mark and Dean, and there was one more too, but I can't think right off the top of my head here.
Sure.
But over the years, and I can't forget the Frishes. If you listen to the Twins games at all, Bremer talks about the Frishes. And Hank Frisch probably was the one I had the most. I coached Rick some when I actually managed Dumont for a couple of years, the town team at Dumont. So those are some of the names that come to my mind. And later on, I had two sons that played, Craig and Jeff. And there was a Nielsen boy that was an outstanding pitcher, and Roger Denton, and Grunwald's, we were fortunate. My biggest problem was I had probably 7 really good players, and I had to fill in with 2. And it seems when we got in the tournaments, the other teams managed to find those younger players, and we'd have an error or something that kept us from making it to the big show.
Yeah.
But we did win. We won several. Back in those days, it was a little different, and they had sub-districts and district and region. And in these later years, they've gone to subsection and section, and then the state tournament. So that was a little different deal.
Yeah. And so I recently talked with Jerry Schultz about his baseball career and going on and playing in the minor leagues. Did you have Jerry as well?
Yeah, that would really be a mistake not to not to mention Jerry, because he was one of the really outstanding players they had, and the only one that went on and signed a contract with the Yankees, and I think he played like 3 or 4 years in the minors. He was an outstanding athlete in all sports.
And so when it came to teams, you coached throughout the 60s and 70s and 80s and pretty much through the 90s, right?
I coached until 2003 was the last year.
Oh, wow. Okay, so all the way through.
Yes.
Are there any particular teams that stand out that you remember, or particular tournaments that come to mind?
Oh, golly. Well, I might just mention that during that time, we played in 3 different conferences. The one with the big schools, the resort region. And I have a tendency to forget that when I played in it, it was called the Minn Kota Conference. I have to make sure I don't make the wrong mistake there. But we won that one year. I guess I actually don't remember exactly what year it was. And then we played in the Pheasant Conference, and we won that. And we played in the Little Sioux Conference, which was south of us. It was like Dawson and Minneota and Appleton down in that area. So we won them all at least once.
Yeah.
But I don't remember all the years exactly.
And do you remember, was there a period of time where you felt like the level of play was at the highest, or the interest in baseball was at its peak?
Well, I guess through my years, probably the interest was greatest in the early years after World War II, because that was about the time people started buying lake cabins and boats and that kind of thing, and that took away a little bit of the interest for a while. But then it has certainly come back since then, I'd say. It made a difference locally. I know when the Minnesota Twins arrived, People took probably a little more interest in that and lost a little interest in local sports. But those things have kind of reversed.
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota is kind of known as a hotbed for summer baseball, I think. Where my sons live in Melrose, that area is really a hotbed for baseball. They got beautiful stadiums, and like at Freeport, if you've ever been through Freeport, it's worth it just to stop in and see the baseball stadium. But those are little towns that they really enjoy their baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. The town team stuff is really popular in Minnesota. So speaking of your sons, when your kids got into school, and you ended up coaching them as well, I assume.
Yes, I did. That was one of the enjoyable times of my coaching.
What are some memories of coaching your kids?
Well, the oldest son is Craig, and I'd have to list him as one of the 10 best players I probably had through the years in school. Played shortstop and pitched a little, and he was probably the most powerful hitter I had. I remember as a sophomore, we were playing at Chicago. If you've ever been to the Chicago Stadium, they have a center field scoreboard over the top of a grandstand, and he hit a home run over that. That was the first I realized how much power he had.
Wow.
And then my second son was Jeff, and he played. He caught for me and was a good catcher. And it was really fun having them.
And they also were pretty successful in basketball. What do you remember about just following them, even if you weren't the head coach at the time?
Well, I never missed a game. I know I was athletic director at that time, so I tended to go to most everything. Craig's team, he graduated, I believe it was in '82. They beat Breckenridge in the finals of the district and went on and played Staples at Concordia, where they lost. If they had a really talented big man, they would have been outstanding. They had like a Whitey Feline, Mike Feline, he's no better as Whitey.
Mm-hmm.
There was a Kearns boy that played, and a Vipon, Larry Vipon, and Ron Zabel, who was the biggest kid. I think Ron stood probably 6'4", 6'5", and my son Craig, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but it's about the best I can do.
I know that
Jeff?
That Breckenridge game exists somewhere on VHS. I'm still trying to track it down because I can get it converted and put on the Facebook and YouTube pages for people to watch. But I know that one is out there somewhere.
That was pretty outstanding. That was pretty exciting because over the years, Breck and Wheaton, those two were really competitors, especially in basketball, everything for that matter. Breck had a lot of good athletes over that time, too. They had Ekron that played, Mark Ekron. He ended up being the athletic director and coach at Morris for a number of years. Their Lip was the coach, Brady Lip, and they had sons that were good athletes. And that was always a real challenge. Earlier, probably Morris and Benson were more challenges to Wheaton.
Mm-hmm.
Chicago had the Alberta CA. They had some really good teams in those years. Clinton had some really good athletes, especially in baseball. We beat them in the district finals one year. Brian Buchholz walked, and Craig Burley hit a home run, and we ended up winning. I think it ended up like 2-0.
Mm-hmm.
So we had some real challenges and there were good athletes in this area.
Did it come to a point where you started noticing that you were coaching the sons of a lot of your former players?
Oh. Yeah, I remember calling them some by their dad's names. Yes, there was quite a few of those over the years. I did that in class a couple times too, and the kids busted out laughing.
Yeah.
But yes, you end up that way, right?
Right. Yeah,
but that was fun and interesting too.
I was joking at during the intro that because I've seen these old team photos from your early years there, where you have a baby face and you look like you're actually younger than some of the players on the team.
Well, I was not a big drinker, but when I went out with fellow teachers, I got carded until I was almost 40 years old, I think.
And then by the end of your career, you were decades older than the players that you were.
Yeah, that's true, right?
Uh-huh.
I ended up during spring baseball when we were in the gym, and that wasn't the best thing, but that's all we had. We then usually end up playing a game of basketball, and I played with them right till the last year that I coached.
Nice.
I was in a little better shape. I didn't weigh 250 pounds then.
Right. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about was your memories of the fire at the Wheaton High School and the transition over to the new school.
Yes, I remember that very well. What was it? What day was it? Was it
April Fool's Day, I believe? April Fool's Day.
It was April Fool's Day, right?
1972, if I'm correct.
Okay. A fellow teacher's wife called us and told us we were missing the event of the decade. What in the world is that? Well, the school's on fire, so it was actually in the evening. I suppose it was 9:30, 10:30. We were ready for bed, I think, and got dressed and went up to the school and ended up getting recruited to go down into the basement. They had a vault down there where they kept a lot of the records and statistics. And we went down there and took that out. And that was kind of a scary experience because the lights were out. It was dark and you could hear the fire crack. There was a firewall and you could hear it burning up against that and taking the records out. And I was glad to get out. But it was quite an event. It was for the next 2, 3, 4 years before they got the new school built. It was quite a hassle for sports. We went to Peaver, South Dakota to practice, and we had classes all over town in the locker plant. I think it was in the locker plant. They had Fayed, the basements of churches, and there were a couple of buildings uptown that were vacated that they had office, I know, and it was really wonderful when we got our new school.
Where did you teach your classes?
I was in the part that didn't burn. I was on the, it would be the second floor, and the oldest part of the building didn't burn. The newer part burnt. We had a really nice gym area with stadium seats. People loved it to watch games and stuff, and that all burnt. But the part that I was in actually did not burn. And I stayed in there. I didn't have to travel around town for my classes anyway.
Did it still smell like smoke when you started class?
Oh, it did for a time. It did for a time, yeah. But there was a firewall between the newer part and the older part, and that kind of kept that decent. Excuse me.
Okay. And then when you got into the new school, what were your thoughts on the new facilities?
Well, it was hard to like because it was wonderful, but the concept at that time was to not have any walls. And Neil Johnson and I, just as an example, were on the far north end, and I faced him and he faced me, and there were no walls, and we both lectured considerable amounts, and we were in social studies, and we showed films, and that was kind of a pain. If you go to the school now, you'll find that there's walls all over. They put them in later on. It just didn't work. It was too disruptive. Kids would walk down the halls when the library was right by us too, and they would use the library and they'd be walking down the halls. And you know how young people are. They can wave, and it gets to be kind of a fun time. So, but eventually, of course, it was really nice.
Well, whose idea was that to have no walls?
Well, I think it might have been our superintendent that was kind of the leader of it, a man by the name of Walter Nosek, and I shouldn't say anything bad about him at this time because he's gone. But it was a concept that they had at that time, and it didn't work.
And what was the idea behind it, though? What was the
Who
idea
knows
or the
for sure?
theory? Okay. That everybody is like
I
all is one and we're all learning together?
maybe something like that. Yeah. I had a loud voice, and I was quite a ways from the main office, and I know once in a while they could hear me preaching up there.
And
Probably
so
2 blocks.
no, when I was in,
Go ahead.
you retired before I made it to high school, but your room was the one that Russ Armstrong took over, right?
Right, Russ took my position pretty much.
Okay, and so
I still did some substituting at that time.
we had you as a sub for sure, and so that
Okay.
by the time I started, Neil Johnson's room did have walls around it, but then the Russ Armstrong room still had it had 3 walls, and then it was open to the hallway.
Yeah. Oh yeah. They started putting them in gradually, but it was just it didn't work. They had some probably. Eventually, they brought in some barriers that were probably you could see over the top of them. That did very little too.
Mm-hmm.
It just didn't work very good. I don't think there was any teachers that liked it very well at that time.
Well, that's a good story to share, though. So then, what do you think of the new gym and all the other aspects of the new school?
Oh, there's a lot of pluses to it now. When they finally got everything ironed out, it's still a very nice school. They keep it up very good.
And then was it easier to hold practice in the bigger gym? I mean, I know it didn't have the stadium seating that everybody always talks about, but did it give more space for practice, or what was the situation like?
Oh yeah, we had 3 gyms that ran side by side, and of course that was the time that girls was getting going too, and of course that was always at the time it seemed like a hassle, but they worked it out. They had morning practices, and of course there wasn't a wrestling room at the time. They actually wrestled on the stage of the auditorium. They had their practices. I don't know what they do now. I haven't been up there for a long time.
Yeah.
But it was very nice. It's hard to beat new.
Right. So, just to kind of start to wrap it up a little bit here, what are some of your top memories as a teacher and as a coach in Wheaton? Oh
man. You're really narrowing it down on me. Golly. One of the first years that I was at Wheaton, we got a new student in the morning, and our principal showed him around. He ended up passing away in his office. A man by the name of Edgar Olson. That was kind of a low point in my career. High points. There's so many. I really enjoyed young people, mm-hmm. and who celebrate with every achievement they have. We had, and of course, I was always big into sports. My whole life, I spent being a coach. I lettered in 5 sports when I was in high school. Had success at that, and I'm in 2 Hall of Fames in Ferguson Athletics, and I'm in the Minnesota State High School Coaches Association Hall of Fame, and also the Baseball Coaches Hall of Fame. So I'm proud of those things, and they all have to do pretty much with the Wheaton High School. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think I got a plaque on the wall yet in the hallway with Peter Nance and some of Christy Kramer, I think, has a picture there.
Yep.
There's so many highlight things. Proms, good friendships you made. Jim Hankus was our football coach for years, and he and I became very close friends. Hunted together, fished together, and again, he got associated all with the school. Winning tournaments and even plays and class plays that were put on, even concerts stand out. We were really fortunate, I think, at Wheaton to have good people.
Yeah.
I'm talking about teachers. Very seldom did you get somebody that, maybe I was one of them, was on the lower echelon, but they were just good. They kept you together, went through that period where they were going to cut sports, I remember I was athletic director, and I went to every school board meeting. I think for a year there, they were going to cut baseball, and I fought to keep that going. And with the lack of finances, they had to look to cut, and that wasn't a fun thing.
Yeah.
The early years were the best because money wasn't a problem. I remember our principal back then, if we went to a school function, would pick up the tab, but in the later years, those kinds of things didn't happen. It was, and to this day, I think they're trying to find, they got to cut here and there a little bit to keep things going, but that's just the world we live in.
Right.
Overall and all, it was just a real great experience to be part of Wheaton High School.
Yeah. And so, I meant to ask more about the time that you were athletic director. How long of a period was that?
I was athletic director for 17 years. When Jim Hankus retired, he had back surgery, and he ended up leaving the profession, and I took over. And we have to subtract 17 from 92 would be the year that I took over. And I was athletic director. And I went through a tough period because back in those days, we weren't always part of a conference. These people that have a conference, their schedules are pretty much set.
Yeah, and so you got us into the Fezzik conference, is that right?
Yeah, yes. And then also the... what's the other one?
Little Sioux or something like that?
Yeah, the Little Sioux, right. The Little Sioux we were in for a time, and then the Pheasant Conference, yes. But we ended up playing everywhere. We were up in the Iron Range playing football. We were in the cities playing basketball game. I spent hours on the telephone trying to schedule.
Yeah.
And, because nothing was set. There was no conference. You didn't have 2 games with this team and 2 games with that team and so on. And it was a lot of work. It really was. And so I enjoyed every minute.
Some of the highlights, from that time period would include kind of the rise of the girls basketball team and their trips to the state tournament.
Yeah. My goal was always to sit on the bench in Williams Arena or the
Target Center.
The Target Center or Williams Arena, and I got to do that with the girls basketball team twice. That was absolutely outstanding.
Yeah,
yeah, that was enjoyable.
And then one other thing that just came to mind, because we could probably talk all day, but you also oversaw the switch to 9-man football when you were athletic director. Do you remember much about that? What was that controversial at all at the time? Did people want to hang on to 11-man, or was football participation going down at that time, or what do you remember about that?
Yeah, to me that's always been a disappointment because I was an 11-man person, but it's worked out really well for Wheaton with fewer people, fewer kids, and they've been very successful with it. Neil was successful, and now they're very successful, and managed to go down to the state tournament with them too in football. That was a fun time. I don't think it was super controversial. Wheaton, I hate to say this, maybe one that I remember, football was never as important, let's put it that way, as basketball or baseball probably, but certainly they like it and love it, and they're very proud of their teams. But I don't remember a lot of discussion about switching to 9-man that way, negatively. I think it was something they realized probably had to happen.
Yeah.
And again, they've been very successful with it.
Yeah, at this point, it was probably the right choice. I'm sure. I mean, there is no choice at this point.
No, right. I guess in the back of my mind, I was kind of hoping they'd end up back in 11-man when they joined up with these schools. That was a major change. I got started with it a little bit in that we started dealing with Herman and Rossalt, South Dakota, and going together with like baseball and the early sport, maybe football, maybe, although that came later.
Yeah, I think
that started it.
Sure. Yep. I think they went for track and for basketball first with Herman.
Okay. And baseball, I think, about the same time, though.
Yep.
Because every year I'd probably have 1 or 2 or 3 really good baseball players, either from there or Russell, too. Mm-hmm. That was kind of a fun experience, but...
All right. Well, I suppose we should start to wrap it up here. So it's been awesome catching up with you, George, and I learned a lot here. And so I had no idea that you were the first wrestling coach in Wheaton. You were at one point head basketball coach, head baseball coach, athletic director.
Yes.
Are we missing anything?
Yes. Oh, not a whole lot, I don't think. One thing I wanted to mention is my claim to fame. A lot of people probably don't know it. I played against Roger Maris in American Legion when I was in Ferguson. He was in Fargo.
Wow.
That's my claim to fame.
What do you remember about that?
Well, I have the box score. Well, 2 things I remember. I played second base in my high school days. And he was a left-handed hitter, and he hit a ground ball to me, and I went after it maybe half-hearted. And by the time I picked the ball up, he was crossing first base. He could really run. I remember that.
Wow.
And I have a box score that he had 3 hits and I had 2. So I kind of cherish those kinds of things.
That's awesome. What was it?
Moose.
Oh, go ahead.
I got to see Moose Scourin play. If you remember that name, he played for the Yankees during their golden days, and I saw Max Lanier. A lot of people don't even recognize names, I'm sure. And I also saw Satchel Paige pitch during my days with the Red Sox in Fergus. So a lot of those kinds of things I could talk about forever.
Right.
I better not.
So then what was it like then to see Roger Maris break the home run record in 1961?
He proved before he broke it that he was a power hitter, but I never dreamt he'd be a power hitter. He was more very skilled and could run like a deer and was just an outstanding athlete. There were several of those Maris boys, and of course he gained the most fame. And back in those days, I think that school they went to was called Sacred Heart, but I can't remember for sure, and I think it's become Shanley in later years. That's where he went to school. And, you kind of pat yourself. I played against him, Going to Fargo, you probably, at the mall in Fargo, seen his display of bats and balls and things like that. And I've stood there and looked at that a few times.
Right.
But I played against that guy.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that story as well. Well, it's been great talking to you, George.
Forever.
Yeah, I know. I know. And I think people could listen forever, too.
The older you get, the more you like to reminisce,
Absolutely. Well,
I just read a thing that said, I read a little thing that said, as you get older, you get to be a better athlete all the time.
I know. I'm definitely starting to get to that point, too.
That's all you got left.
Right. All right. Well, thanks so much, George. And thanks, everyone, for listening. And George, we really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you for calling. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye.
Yep. Bye-bye.
This episode of Talkin' Wheaton Sports is brought to you by Love's CBD Hemp Oil, the strongest CBD oil for the lowest price. Visit loveshempoil.com to order now. See you next time.